Welcome to the Fishing Daily podcast. In this episode, I will be speaking with Mike Park from the Scottish Whitefish Producers Association, and we will be discussing the cuts in North Sea cod for 2024, and we'll be looking at other aspects of what is happening within the industry. Welcome, Mike.
Good morning.
The Northern Fisheries Alliance isn't happy about the ICES advice for cod fishing opportunities in 2024. The advice seems it's going against what ICES reports itself. And has there been any feedback from ICES as why they have decided to cut cod rather than increase it?
There's been no direct feedback to us in the Alliance. I mean, obviously, the various actors within their own nation states will be talking to their own governments. And I know there's some governments or some administrations think that, it's a complete overreach by ICES. And indeed, in the Northern Fishing Alliance come to that conclusion as well. Because if you look at the advice this year, and indeed the information held within the data sheets that ICES produce, which is on the back of a recent benchmark. So this year they're giving, advice for 3 separate stocks as opposed to just North Sea cod, which was in the past. If you look at the advice they give for these 3 stocks, we can see that whereas the southern stock is perhaps more vulnerable in as much as that it's not above the limit reference points, the northern 2 stocks are doing well. And indeed, the southern stock has increased in biomass 5-fold since 2020. So if you look at all that sort of sets of positive advice, you would imagine that the total allowable catch for next year would be greater than this year because all the stocks are on an upward trajectory. Having said that, ICES headline advice takes a different approach. And it applies an ad hoc precautionary approach to the southern stock, not the MSY approach that you would expect. And it says that you should apply that same ad hoc approach to the northern 2 stocks. Now, what that means to the fishermen is that whereas if you look at these stocks in isolation and you apply the MSY approach, it should deliver around about 34,000 tonne. If you just take the headline advice that ICES says, which is trying to manage a more vulnerable southern stock, you end up at 22,000 tonne. Now that's a difference of 12,000 tonne, and that equates to £40 million of lost revenue for the industry, and for the UK it probably equates to £30 million of that 40 million in terms of cod. So it's a significant difference. And also, if you look at what the joint total allowable catch between west of Scotland, which this new approach now covers, and the North Sea, that was 27,000 tonne in 2023. So if you hit the 22,000 tonne, that's a 5,000 tonne less of opportunities next year relative to this year, when in fact you should be getting 7,000 tonne more at 34,000 tonne. So that's the dilemma we have. And if you reduce the TAC of cod at this time, when the biomass is going up, you can just imagine what that means in the landings obligation, choke species and all the rest of it. So yeah, so to say that we're not pleased, I guess, is a fair assessment.
And this comes at a time as well when your members have been working along with the marine researchers from ICES, fisheries researchers from ICES. Does this feel that the relationship has been compromised after all the work that's been put in?
I don't think it's been compromised. I mean, we thought that we were starting to work more closely with ICES. If you recall, the Northern Fishing Alliance held a benchmark, or a symposium ahead of the benchmark last November, and then it held a post-benchmark seminar, and I think it was March or April of this year. Now, we think that should be the template going forward, and we're trying to get another symposium arranged now ahead of the monkfish benchmark. So it doesn't necessarily prejudice that relationship. But I think what it does do is raise questions about where ICES competence lies. ICES there is, as far as we see it, ICES is there to provide the range of information, and it's for managers to then decide which course of action they want to take. Because suggesting, as they have done in their headline advice, that is what we should do to protect the southern stock, assumes that there is no other alternative out there. And in this day and age, once ICES comes out with headline advice, the ENGOs will ensure that ministers' feet are held to the fire to ensure that they maintain that line, and it's the headline advice that's applied. Where in this case, it would be a complete undersell of the sort of the sustainability of the cod stock at the moment, which is the biomass is reasonably high and it's increasing. So for us, that's a positive. And I have to say this as well, that we're always coming under the cosh for overfishing. But in this instance, we don't want to overfish. All we want to do is get a total allowable catch that's in line with the maximum sustainable yield approach. That's all we're asking. No more, no less. So it's not that we're asking for something we shouldn't get. It's just that headline advice now prejudices a movement towards that 34,000 ton.
And another sense as well, like you were saying earlier on, like cod is a choke species for other fish such as haddock and so on. And this also has a financial impact on the boats when they have to steam away from good fishing.
Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't rule out the fact that you've got Ukraine, you've now got Israel. The price of fuel is on an upward trajectory again in terms of the cost of the vessels. You're now talking about high interest rates. Most of our vessels don't have fixed rates, so the interest rate payments to the bank is now higher than it was before. You're right. We're going to be wasting time moving away from the higher abundances of cod. But I think fundamentally the real flawness about this whole approach is that ICES has applied a mixed fisheries approach to substocks of one species. What they're saying in essence is, to protect the southern stock, we need to reduce the tax of the northern stock, notwithstanding that they're not, there's very little connection between them. But that doesn't take into consideration the biggest biomass of haddock in history. A biomass of whiting now that's on the up, saithe fishery, hake fishery, halibut, sole, monkfish, all the other fisheries around it. It doesn't take into consideration those fisheries. And if you are going to apply a mixed fisheries approach, as they tried to do this year in the Celtic Sea, you have to bring everything else down in line with it. Either that, it doesn't work, it doesn't marry. So in this instance, they've applied a mixed fisheries approach to the substocks of one species that is just one species and a very, very complex mixed fishery, which is, as I say, in our part, is nonsense.
Yeah, I was watching. Sorry, I was watching a council meeting a few years ago, and there was marine researchers in it, and they made it seem very easy that fishing boats can target one species without hitting upon another species. But in reality, that's not the case.
It is the case. I mean, it only takes significant shifts in where you're fishing to achieve that. So, if you only want to achieve, catching whiting or whatever, then there are areas that you can go to catch more whiting than you would catch in other areas. But there's never a certainty that all you're going to catch is whiting and you're not going to catch cod. There's always that possibility that you're going to catch fish you don't want. Although there is a general appreciation that in different areas of the sea, you will catch different species or you will catch a different mix of species. But we can't say we'll go there, get haddock, we'll go there, get cod, we'll go there, get whiting. There is always that intermix, but just to various degrees.
Mike, moving on to our next topic, how has 2023 been so far for your members? I know it's been tight between rising fuel costs and different things.
Yeah, I mean it's been tight for every sector, to be fair. Rising fuel costs or high fuel costs earlier in the year, of course, it's slackened for a while, but it's now back up again. That just eats, into the bottom line for everyone. The nephrops fishery over the summer has been very, very poor. The nephrops are not showing on the ground, so it's been very, very tight with them. The larger vessels, they depend on things like monkfish and ling and other things like that. That's been scarce in terms of quota. So whereas the boats are getting by, they're not making the level of profits that they require for future investment. And I guess that's the difficulty that we have. It's almost post-Brexit has delivered a clear us and them situation if you look at demersal and you look at pelagic. I think, some of the figures coming out of the Scottish Government just over the last few weeks in the consultation for additional quota suggests, I think, is that 85% of all post-Brexit benefits have been achieved by the pelagic sector. So, we find ourselves now that we're almost the poor boy of post-Brexit. And I guess it's up to government to try and resolve some of that issues. But it is tight for our members at the moment, and to say anything else would not be telling the truth, to be fair. But even within that, you've got some vessels doing better than others, but the profitability down is almost, it's across the fleet.
What can the UK government do about it? What could the Scottish government do in order to help ease the situation or strengthen the whitefish sectors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can do many things. It can start treating the catching sector as a sector rather than, pelagic, demersal, nephrops, whitefish, because there is a lot of additional quota coming into the sector now. And indeed, the Scottish consultation is about what do we do with that additional quota? The pelagic sector just got a benefit from giving access to Norway to our waters. I can't remember the percentage, above 3% they got of mackerel. Well, that can be used to benefit everyone, just not a few. And I think the Scottish government and indeed the UK government at wide have got to take into consideration that if they want a cross-industry at-sea sector, then they're going to have to make some brave decisions.
Yeah, it's a situation where, the fishing industry, the whitefish industry seems to be getting left behind in a lot of countries, whereas the pelagic sectors are getting stronger, and it is up to the governments in order to balance it, in order to provide a fair playing field. Between now and the end of the year, what's the big events coming up for Scottish fishermen?
Okay, so at the moment, as I speak to you, I'm in London because the UK-EU bilateral is going on just now. Next week, we're in Brussels, round 2 of the UK-EU bilateral. And then 2 weeks after that, we're into the trilateral with Norway, and we're into the UK-Norway bilateral as well. And then on the 6th, 7th of December, we're up in Faroe for the Faroe bilateral, where we give fish to Faroe and we get access to Faroe, and they give us fish to catch as well. We give them fish to catch. So these are all important discussions towards the end of the year. But it's going to be difficult this year because, we have very little collateral to give to Norway. We've got very little collateral to give to Faroe. And that's, feeds back to the previous discussion about, what does the government do to solve this problem? And I guess they've got to stop looking at the industry in silos and just, try and solve it as a sector rather than silos of a sector. But, all my fishermen have got a keen eye on the price of fuel at the moment. There's less quota going about in terms of cod and monkfish that they would like, which are very expensive products at first sale. That's where we make the money. Lease costs for both are high at the moment, which eats into any profitability. So, the question being, what are fishermen looking for? They're looking for more opportunities and less costs and higher profitability. We're scraping the barrel in profitability just now, and as I say, that then hampers future investment in the sector. And if you're not investing, then indeed you're going astern. So it's difficult at the moment. It really is, and hopefully we can get a big increase in cod for next year. We can see away some of the reductions in monk and ling that are proposed for next year, because there's a saying, and as well as I do, that everything comes out the cod end, and if there's nothing to come out of the cod end, then profitability doesn't exist. So yeah, we need to be very careful over this next 12 months how we treat and how we respond to the plights of the demersal sector.
A few times we were speaking before, we discussed the fact that there was a shortage of fishermen coming into the industry. Has that improved, or is there any change on it, or is there anything coming up?
No, it hasn't changed in the meantime. You'll perhaps seen in the press that we've been allocated 3 million in grant funding to build new headquarters, training facilities, and hopefully we can use that as a sort of genesis to try and attract future youngsters into the sector. I mean, what we're finding now is that it's the sons and the daughters of skippers that are coming into the sector rather than the community at large. And it's not just us. You've more and more school leavers going on to further education now than ever before. Less and less school leavers now want to get their hands dirty in dirty industries. and fishing is one. And if they do want to get their hands dirty and they prefer a marine career, then you've got Royal Navy, Merchant Navy, oil and gas. You've now got offshore wind. The west of Scotland, you've got fish farms. You've now got seaweed farming and fishing, because it's a way of life rather than a vacation. It's a way of life rather than just a job. We find that we're at the bottom of even that pecking order, which means that there is relatively few coming into the sector. And now we've got the pressures of the transit visa, the new Nationality and Borders Act, which makes it totally illegal to fish inside 12. So now in some areas, there's a dependency on the skilled worker visa, and we can't get the non-UK fishermen, or we can't get any numbers through their English exam that they need to come in with the skilled worker visa. So, whereas, we're talking about the problems of the allowable catches and opportunities just a second ago, we face a big problem with getting recruitment into the sector, or providing young men and women into the sector to fill the roles that are now being vacated at the top end by the older generation now retiring and moving out. And we can't just depend wholly on non-UK crew. We need youngsters coming in, because they are the skippers, the mates, the engineers of the future.
Has there been any discussions with the Department of Foreign Affairs in relation to improving opportunities for fishermen coming in from abroad?
We've spoken to them, myself and Harry Wick from Ireland have been on a campaign this past while. We've been visiting Belize to try and get fishermen in from Belize, because that's a major English-speaking country, and you don't need the CELT English certificate. We've talked to the Home Office about lessening the requirement from B standard to A standard, which means so the B standard is 4-component: reading, writing, speaking, listening. A standards pretty much mean you having a conversation. So we've asked for that to be reduced. They said no. They've put it on the shortage occupation list in terms of fishing, but that only allows you to reduce the wage. But if you can't get people into the industry and the wage they're on, reducing the wage doesn't solve the problem. So no, there's very little sympathy being shown towards the sector with regards to the problems they face. And, I've got to be clear here. It's not, when we talk about the transit visa and the 12-mile, there is a thought process goes, well, that's just small inshore vessels. There's a 12-mile limit around St Kilda. There's a 12-mile limit around Rockall, Fowler. All these outcrops, there's a 12-mile limit around. So even our biggest vessels fishing at Rockall, fall foul of the same regulation. And I'm not entirely sure people realise that.
Yes, it's complicated. And, in a sense, they could make the regulations a lot simpler in order to let boats function. Now, as you mentioned earlier there, you did receive funding from the DEFRA Infrastructure Fund. Could you tell us about how that will be used?
So it's from the Training Infrastructure Fund. So we've been given a grant of 3 million. The total cost of the project just now is about 4.2 million. So the 3 million, basically makes up about 73%, I think it is, of the total project. And then we will be putting our own funding to match that, not to match it, but in 27%, we will be putting Scottish Whitefish funds into that. And that building, whereas it will be our headquarters, it will also be the headquarters of NEFTA, who deliver the most fishing training courses in the UK. We've also got a crew services company that will be in there. We're also looking to provide offices for the onshore, the Seafood Association, Jimmy Buchan, and the Seafood Association, and any other sort of fisheries connected business that wants to come in there. So, but more importantly, it allows us to professionalize what we do, and it'll be a centre. So, for instance, we'll hold all our meetings there, and it would be very useful in the future if we can get some of the international negotiations up there as well, because there'll be a large boardroom, there'll be breakout rooms. So, yeah, so we've got good things hopefully in the future happening in the building.
Yeah, that sounds a more idealistic place to be having conversations about fishing rather than in London or some other city. Mike, there was an incident recently where the trawler Defiant was basically was attacked by a foreign trawler, the Antonio Maria. In general, how good is the relationship between the EU vessels and the Scottish vessels?
It's a fractious relationship. at the moment, and it's about vessel numbers, it's about congregation of vessels, it's about locking out areas of the shelf edge that our vessels traditionally fish. No one has ownership of the seas, but once you lay down static gear, then essentially the time your gear's in the water, you're taking ownership of that sea space, and it's trying to manage that issue sensibly going ahead will be our aim. Indeed, we've sat down now twice with the Scottish Government, with our Shetland colleagues, and some of the UK flag vessels through the Aberdeen PO, trying to work out or formalise a code of conduct that can actually allow both sets of operators, both static, whether it be gillnet or line, and mobile, in a cohesive manner. Because what we don't want is for situations like we saw last week to escalate where it puts life at harm. We saw that facilitating itself down in the channel with the French scallop boats, etc., over recent years. And it can escalate quickly, and it's very easy at sea to put people in danger. And I think we need, as responsible leaders and responsible fishermen, we need to ensure that there are systems in place, regulatory or otherwise, that allow both actors to operate in the same sea space at the same time.
Well, thank you, Mike, for joining us, and it's always been, as always, it's a pleasure and very informative to find out what's happening with yourself and your members, and hopefully we'll be speaking to you again.
Okay, you take care.
Thank you, Mike.